Some buildings don't feel empty, even when no one has stepped inside them for decades. This asylum was abandoned years ago, its doors locked, its corridors left to rot in silence. But staff reports, maintenance logs, and eyewitness accounts all suggest the same thing. Something here never left. Tonight, we're not chasing ghosts. We're documenting what remains, the sounds, the movements, and the unexplained events recorded long after the last patient was gone. And once you hear what was witnessed inside these walls, you may never look at abandoned places the same way again. These buildings weren't created as places of horror. When Britain's asylums were first built, they were meant to represent care, order, and protection. Long corridors, high ceilings, and thick stone walls were designed to calm the mind and separate patients from a world that didn't understand them. At least, that was the intention. What happened inside often told a very different story. Mental health treatment in the past was shaped by fear, misunderstanding, and social pressure. Many patients were admitted not because they were dangerous, but because they were inconvenient, grieving too long, speaking too freely, or simply refusing to conform. Records show overcrowded wards, long-term confinement, and treatments that today would be unthinkable. These walls didn't just witness illness, they absorbed despair. When these institutions finally closed, they weren't cleared or cleansed. They were sealed, left to decay with beds still lined up, files abandoned, and personal belongings scattered where patients last touched them. And strangely, reports of activity didn't stop with abandonment. In many cases, they increased. Footsteps in empty wings, voices where no one stood, movements with no visible cause. That's why we're here. This isn't about thrill-seeking or provoking the unseen. Our aim is to tell you what has been recorded, reported, and repeatedly experienced inside these asylums, using history, architecture, and first-hand accounts. We approach these places with restraint and respect, because if something truly lingers here, it deserves to be understood, not exploited. Abandoned asylums don't decay evenly. Some rooms collapse quickly, while others seem strangely preserved, as if time hesitated before touching them. Corridors stretch on longer than they should, ceilings loom higher than comfort allows, and doorways narrow just enough to make you feel watched as you pass through. These buildings were designed to control movement, sound, and behavior, and even now, they still do. Isolation cells were often built away from main wards, separated by thick stone walls and heavy doors. Many were windowless, some were padded. Historical records describe patients hearing voices in these rooms long after others were removed. Years later, similar experiences were reported by security staff, surveyors, and authorized visitors granted access during closure periods, describing muffled knocking, sudden pressure changes, and the sense that some rooms were occupied even when they clearly weren't. Then there are the staircases. Worn smooth by decades of use, they often sit at the center of reported activity. Footsteps are commonly heard moving up and down, sometimes stopping just behind whoever is listening. Architects originally designed these stairwells to carry sound efficiently for staff supervision. That same design now allows even the smallest noise to travel or appear to. Treatment rooms tell a quieter story, but no less disturbing. Rusted restraints, broken sinks, and cracked tiles remain fixed in place. These rooms were meant to impose order, yet many reports describe them as the most emotionally overwhelming spaces in the building. People often describe dizziness, nausea, or a sudden urge to leave, reactions that stop the moment they step back into the corridor. What unsettles people most isn't how these buildings look, but how consistently the same reactions are reported in the same locations. Visitors often describe feeling watched in identical rooms, hearing movement in the same stairwells, or experiencing sudden discomfort in specific areas, even when they aren't aware of the building's full history. Whatever causes it, these structures seem to leave a strong impression on the people who enter them long after their original use has been forgotten. In many abandoned asylums, the most disturbing things aren't the rooms themselves, but what was left behind inside them. Beds remain lined up beneath flaking ceilings. Wheelchairs sit angled toward walls. Cupboards still hold bottles with faded labels, their contents long evaporated. These items were never meant to last this long. yet they remain exactly where someone last used them. Medical instruments are often the hardest to look at. Rusted restraints, cracked enamel trays, and broken treatment equipment remain untouched, sometimes laid out as if the room was simply closed for the night. Even people with no interest in the paranormal report feeling overwhelmed in these spaces, lightheadedness, tightness in the chest, or an instinctive need to step away. The reaction tends to fade the moment they leave the room. What makes these objects unsettling isn't the idea that they're haunted. It's that they were once handled every day by people living under intense stress, fear, or confusion. They absorbed routine, emotion, and suffering through repetition. And when people encounter them now, they often describe an emotional response that feels disproportionate to what they're actually seeing. Personal belongings are often found scattered through patient areas, shoes beneath beds, combs on windowsills, handwritten notes folded into drawers. In some cases, names and dates are still visible. People who encounter these items frequently describe a sudden shift in mood, a feeling of intrusion, as though they've entered a space that still belongs to someone else. It's not fear exactly, it's discomfort, mixed with a sense of being out of place. What stands out is how often these objects are mentioned in reports, even when nothing else unusual occurs. Certain rooms are repeatedly described as difficult to remain in, with visitors choosing to leave without being able to explain why. In many cases, the discomfort is linked to specific items or areas, not to the building as a whole. Whether this reaction is psychological or environmental, the pattern itself is consistent, and it's that consistency that continues to raise questions. Accounts of unusual activity in Britain's abandoned asylums didn't begin after they were closed. Many reports appeared while the buildings were still operational, logged by staff who were more concerned with keeping order than drawing attention. Notes describe footsteps in closed wings, voices heard during night rounds, and doors found open that had been locked. What's notable is how similar reports continued after closure. Visitors, whether authorized or not, began describing the same experiences in the same locations, sounds of movement throughout the building, brief glimpses of figures that vanish, and the sense of being followed through long corridors. In several cases, individuals reported these experiences independently, without knowledge about previous accounts linked to the building. Some people claim to have audio recordings from inside buildings. They have occasionally captured unexplained noises, distant knocks, low murmurs, and sounds resembling footsteps. These recordings are often indistinct and open to interpretation, yet what stands out is when they coincide with reports of activity logged years earlier. The sounds appear in the same areas, without any clear environmental cause. Visual reports tend to be brief and inconsistent. Witnesses rarely describe clear figures. Instead, they mention movement seen in the side of their eye, shadows crossing doorways, or shapes that just disappear. These experiences are usually reported alongside strong physical reactions, sudden unease, disorientation, or an urge to get out of there. Temperature changes are another recurring detail. Multiple accounts describe sudden drops in rooms or corridors. In most cases, drafts and structural explanations were considered and ruled out. While no single incident proves anything on its own, the repetition of these reports across different sites continues to draw attention. What makes these phenomena difficult to dismiss isn't their intensity, but their persistence. The same locations, the same sensations, the same descriptions, repeated over decades by people with no connection to each other. It's important to note that not everyone who visits experiences something unusual, and these encounters raise questions. Are they psychological, environmental, or something not yet understood? What do you think? Have you ever heard of something called residual haunting? This idea isn't based on intelligence or awareness, but on repetition. Certain environments, especially those associated with intense emotion or prolonged stress, may retain traces of past activity that replay under specific conditions. If this occurs, it would explain why reported experiences tend to follow familiar patterns rather than responding to people directly. Supporters of this theory point to the nature of asylum life itself. Many patients lived the same routines day after day, sometimes for years. Movements, sounds, and behaviors were repeated constantly within confined spaces. If an environment were capable of retaining any form of imprint, these buildings would present ideal conditions. Importantly, this explanation doesn't require belief in spirits, only the possibility that extreme human experience can leave lasting effects. This theory is often used to explain why reported sounds or movements don't change over time. Footsteps are heard walking the same routes. Doors appear to open in the same areas. Sensations are described in specific rooms rather than throughout the building. The experiences feel more like echoes than interactions, which is why many investigators consider it. So, what do you think of residual haunting? My view is that it remains a theory, not a conclusion. It doesn't explain every report, and it doesn't remove the need for environmental or psychological explanations. But it does offer a way to understand why these locations continue to produce similar experiences long after they've been abandoned, and why so many accounts sound familiar, even when recorded decades apart. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Not every experience reported inside abandoned asylums is treated as unexplained. In fact, many investigators begin by assuming there is a rational cause. Old buildings shift, air moves unpredictably, and sound travels in ways that can easily distort perception. Long corridors amplify footsteps. Loose materials expand and contract with temperature. In places like these, it's expected that some sensations will feel unusual. Psychological factors are also taken seriously. These environments carry a heavy reputation, and expectation alone can influence how people interpret what they experience. Studies into perception show that unfamiliar or emotionally charged settings can heighten awareness, increase anxiety, and cause ordinary stimuli to feel significant. For this reason, many reports are carefully compared against known environmental conditions before being recorded as paranormal. What draws attention, however, are the moments that remain after those explanations are considered. Instances where temperature changes are measured but no airflow is detected. Sounds recorded in sealed areas with no structural access. Reports that occur during routine visits rather than late-night investigations. These details don't point to answers, but they resist easy dismissal. What remains is a narrow margin. Experiences that sit between explanation and uncertainty. They aren't dramatic, they don't escalate, but they persist. And in investigations like these, persistence is often the most difficult detail to ignore. Being inside these abandoned asylums, what stands out most is not fear, but restraint. Reactions tend to be subtle. A hesitation before entering a room, a sense of unease that doesn't escalate, or the quiet decision to leave earlier than planned. Nothing dramatic happens, yet the experience lingers longer than expected. The responses aren't limited to believers or investigators. They're reported by people with no interest in the paranormal, often during routine visits. What they describe isn't an event, but an influence, something about certain spaces that affects behavior without explanation. And that's the point. These buildings no longer serve a purpose, yet they continue to shape the experience of those who enter them. Not through spectacle, but through repetition. The same reactions in the same places, recorded again and again. Some places don't ask to be believed, they simply leave an impression that's difficult to ignore. Good night.